Esteemed religious leaders, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the CAICID team in Vienna, Austria, and our partner organizations, the G20 Association, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, and the National Committee for Interfaith and Intercultural Dialogue in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it is my pleasure to welcome you today to the fourth day of the G20 Interfaith Forum 2020. Following our sessions in the previous days on the role of religious actors in peace building, the way religious communities address COVID-19, and the importance of religious leaders to empower women and young people, today's deliberations and contributions will focus on religious action to address threats of climate change, as well as human rights and freedom of religion and belief. Before we start, I would like to introduce those of you who might join us for the first time to the virtual environment of this gathering. On the bottom left corner, you will find supporting documents for plenaries and panel discussions, such as recommendations from regional consultations and policy briefs that were compiled in the previous months for this forum. On the right-hand side, there is an opportunity to exchange during the session in a chat. We encourage you to introduce yourself, to post questions you would like today's sessions to raise, and to interact with other participants. Please note that this chat is meant to be a safe space to connect with other participants and to ask questions to the panels. Please remain respectful and dialogical in the chat, and please note that offensive or abusive comments will be removed by our moderators. For interpretation from Arabic to English or English to Arabic, please click on the respective buttons just below the live streams. And to access the Spanish interpretation of this plenary, please click on the designated button just above the live stream. In case you miss any of the sessions and would like to catch up, please visit our YouTube channel to view full recordings or any of the partners' website or social media for other highlights. Now it is a pleasure for me to introduce the first keynote speaker of today, His Excellency Engineer Abdulrahman bin Abdul Mohsen Al-Fadli, Minister of Agriculture and Environment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Your Excellency Al-Fadli, the floor is yours.
In the name of God, most gracious and most merciful, Your Excellency Secretary General of CAICID, Your Excellencies, Eminencies, heads of delegations of member states, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. It is a pleasure to welcome you in the G20 Interfaith Forum with the presidency of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to the G20 in 2020, and I am very delighted to participate in this event, which reflects on the role of the G20 states in fostering key economic, social and political issues on the global level. Dear brothers and sisters of the audience, God Almighty created the planet Earth and made humankind His successor to inhabit it, and He created peoples and tribes which are similar in some things and distinct in others. And God sent prophets and messengers to save humanity from the difference in the origins of their lives. Hence, the importance of consolidating the principles of coexistence between peoples and religions, which helps to achieve security, stability, and peace. On the other hand, difference generates wars, conflicts, and backwardness, and the divine religions called for the importance of coexistence, including the Islamic religion, whose tolerant teachings came to regulate the relationship of Muslims within themselves and their relationship with followers of other religions. Islamic Sharia has emphasized protecting and preserving the environment, since it is considered a life necessity in achieving the interests of creation by bringing benefits and warding off evil for the foundations of life, and the jurisprudence rule in Islam indicates preventing evil taking precedence over bringing benefits, and there is no doubt that environmental pollution and the excessive use of its components spoils these foundations of life. Islam did not simply stop at urging to protect the environment, but moreover, in some texts of the Holy Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, it extended in urging the development of legislation and regulations that represent methods of controlling the environment and protecting it from pollution through the enactment of preventative, supervisory, and disciplinary regulations and procedures to preserve the environment and prevent its pollution and destruction. It was mentioned in the Holy Quran, God Almighty said, "Eat and drink of the sustenance provided by Allah, and do not do evil nor mischief." As the Almighty said, "Do not make mischief on the earth." We are only peacemakers, and God created everything as good in itself, beneficial to others. But the humankind interfered with it and irrationally destroyed the environment and its components and depleted its resources. It is hence, and for the continuation of the quality of life in all parts of this universe, wisdom and reason call upon us for preserving the environment, repairing what has been spoiled by the joint collective efforts of all peoples, governments, and organizations coming together to protect the planet Earth and restore the balance of the environment as God created it to be suitable for all life and for all creatures. And in the hadith of our messenger Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, there is evidence of taking care of this manner and urging it, as he said, that Muslims are to plant trees and do it for charity, and that may God give us the power to, even if the hour rises and we are able to plant a tree or a stem, to plant it. Dear audience, the concept of sustainable development in Islam stems from the principle of making use of the planet Earth for the benefit of humankind in accordance with a comprehensive and inclusive understanding for all aspects of life, which means that thriving on and building the Earth represents the main goal of sustainable development, in addition to it being a religious aim. Our meeting today comes during circumstances with great impact on the whole world due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which requires all of us to work on legislating sustainable policies that contribute to empowering people and protecting the planet in accordance to ambitious visions and sustainable plans to face the rapid and various variables and challenges. This can be achieved by supporting collaborative efforts and the exchange of expertise in all fields, especially with regard to climate change. Adopting strict measures and protecting the planet is highly required by promoting moral and religious values regarding our use and distribution of resources. In its presidency of the G20 in the year 2020, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has focused on several axes, the most important of which is creating and preparing conditions which enable everyone to preserve the planet, in addition to strengthening joint efforts to protect the environment, biodiversity, and natural resources. Also, creating new horizons by adopting bold and long-term strategies to share the benefits of innovation and technical progress. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia seeks to preserve natural resources and environmental sustainability and achieve water security. It aspires to contributing to food security, protection of ecosystems, and the quality of life in general, based on its religious and humanitarian principles through the legislative and institutional reforms it has undertaken in all fields. This is reflected in the government approving of the National Environment Strategy, a comprehensive environment in line with international conventions. In addition to serious and diligent work to find solutions to global, national, and regional environmental issues related to the collapse of the terrestrial and aquatic environments or pollution, there is also the adoption of the National Strategy for Water Systems, through which the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia strives to develop its environment, water, and agricultural services in order to preserve, develop, and rationalize resources with a view to their sustainability and optimize utilization of modern technologies. Furthermore, the Kingdom is also working on implementing an agricultural strategy which aims to contribute to achieving food security by taking advantage of the region's comparative advantages and seeking to invest and localize modern agricultural technologies. We are working in the G20 to exchange experiences and expertise to face environmental challenges and create better future opportunities. Through achieving the sustainable development goals represented in the eradication of poverty and hunger, providing clean water, climate action, and partnerships. Several issues have been raised here, including the water resources and environmental sanitation, the protection of terrestrial and aquatic environments, and agriculture in rural areas, and their contribution to the production of more than 80% of food around the world. Amongst the other issues raised is the role of the environment, water, and agricultural systems have in developing human resources in rural areas and a rising productivity to meet the growing demand for food, reduce poverty and hunger according to the Sustainable Development Agenda of 2030. And we in the Kingdom are proud of our short experience in agricultural rural development, through which we invested in small farmers, livestock breeders, workers in aquaculture, fishing and other groups which engage in rural activities that contribute to improving income and community well-being. And to conclude, I welcome you another time in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and thank you for participating and convening. And I thank regional and international organizations and all organizers, and of course to my brother, His Excellency Faisal bin Abdul Rahman bin Abdul Muammar, for his beautiful invitation, and for all eminencies and excellencies, wishing you success and luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your very relevant and timely remarks and examples on climate-responsible agriculture from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I would now like to invite our second keynote speaker of today to the virtual stage, His Excellency Aksel Jacobsen, State Secretary and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in Norway. Your Excellency Jacobsen, you have the floor.
Thank you. Ministers, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, let me first thank you for the invitation to be with you here today at the G20 Interfaith Forum. It's a privilege to speak to all of you, representatives of faith-based communities, civil society and governments, on the topic of faith-based action to address climate change. I believe that the ethical dimensions of climate change should have a stronger voice in the global debate. The science is clear. Climate change is occurring at an alarming rate, and human activities are the primary driver. Climate change worsens existing poverty, exacerbates inequalities, and triggers new vulnerabilities. In fact, climate change now threatens to undo the last 50 years of progress in development, global health, and poverty reduction. Climate change could push more than 120 million more people into poverty by 2030. Floods, droughts, and other forms of extreme weather is a main reason behind today's hunger crisis. More than 820 million people goes to bed hungry tonight. Globally, every fifth child under the age of 5 is stunted because of lack of nutritious food. According to the UN, is 26 million people forced to migrate from their homes every year because of climate change. And it is the most vulnerable, those who have done nothing to cause the problem, who is hardest hit by climate change. The ethical dimension of this dramatic scenario should not be underestimated. In reinforcing this insight, the world's faith communities have a critical, important role to play. I firmly believe that for the world to reach the global goals of Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, we need engagement of the faith community. We need a moral voice, the ethical guidance, and a call to action from religious leaders. We need a commitment and character that faith-based organizations represent when they are at their best. History gives numerous examples where faith community have been a voice for change. In times of hunger and need, faith communities have been a voice for change. In times of conflict and war, faith communities have been a voice for peace and reconciliation. In times of brutality and violence, people of faith have defended human dignity. In times of darkness and sorrow, faith communities have been a voice of hope. Faith communities have built hospitals, started schools, and taken care of marginalized people. And today, we need a faith community, yet another time to rise and be a voice for change. We need spiritual and ethical guidance to steer us in the right direction, the direction of responsible stewardship of the creation. And religious and spiritual leaders have, for a long time, raised awareness of the responsibility we carry in terms of environmental and social stewardship. And many such leaders actively contribute to the protection of nature and sustainable livelihoods. Our deep connection to Earth is reflected in theologies, teachings, and practices of all faiths. Shared commitment to care for the creation yields not only fruits of the earth, but also the fruits of peacemaking. In Norway, the Network for Creation and Sustainability was established already in 2008. This campaign, sponsored by Norway, the Christian Council of Norway, and Norwegian Church Aid, has as one of its ambitions to influence political processes, but also to build environmental engagement across political divides and parties. Other organizations are more focused on their own activities as well as their members' way of living. Leaders for faith-based organizations have been very outspoken in their appeals to abandon consumerism and have ascribed the destructive effects of climate and environment also to individual choices and attitudes. Faith-based organizations demand climate justice. The burdens of reversing the negative spiral should primarily be shouldered by nations and communities that benefited from the growth which caused the negative effects in the first place. The need for cuts in carbon emissions and taking responsibility for future generations are also underlined by believers all over the world. The Norwegian government has regular consultations with faith-based organizations about climate policies, as we do with other parts of the civil society. The Church of Norway and the Norwegian Interfaith Climate Network have been attending the UN Climate COP meetings regularly as part of the broader Norwegian delegation. Let me also mention that Norway has been actively involved in supporting a global interfaith effort since 2017. The Interfaith Rainforest initiative. Our experience is that religious and spiritual leaders can give voice and moral support to the struggle for the protection of nature and the rights of people whose livelihoods depends on it. They can support, complement, and enhance the efforts of government, civil society, and forest-friendly businesses. This specific initiative is solely focused on preventing further destruction of the world's remaining rainforest and the protection of indigenous people. The Interfaith Rainforest Initiative has gained a solid momentum in some of the world's most important rainforest countries. In our experience, the initiative's success is embedded in focusing on a limited field within the climate and environment agenda. The initiative's strong involvement in rainforest countries at the national level is another important factor, ensuring statements and meetings leading to action on the ground. Our goal is that the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative will inspire action and become a shared platform to end deforestation and to work with respective faith traditions, networks, and institutions to make rainforest protection a moral and an ethical priority. Faith is fundamental to the majority of the people in the world. And the world's remaining forests, with its biodiversity, human and non-human inhabitants, are critical for life on Earth. And if the world's community is going to tackle climate change, we simply cannot afford to lose more of the world's biodiversity. Faith communities and their leaders can play an important role in their own response to climate change, but also in supporting or pushing policymakers to move forward the environmental agenda. And let me also underline, and this is important, that in order to benefit from the potential that lies in faith communities, it is essential to secure these communities, their freedom of belief and their right to practice and to teach. I look forward to hearing more about various experiences and initiatives from the speakers in this session's panel. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this insightful comments on the relation of food security and climate change and its ethical dimensions, as well as the need for religious guidance in this area. And I would like to thank both of our keynote speakers for setting the scene for the plenary today, which will focus on religious action to address threats of climate change. It is important to note that climate change is a severe reality for many today, and its direct consequences can be seen and felt all over the globe, often in very existential ways. Today's plenary will be led and moderated by Ms. Bani Dougal, chairperson of the UN Task Force on Engagement with Faith-Based Organizations. Ms. Dougal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I welcome you all to the G20's Interfaith Forum's plenary for discussion. Religious action to address threats of climate change. My name, as you heard, is Bani Dougal, and I represent the Baha'i international community to the UN, and I'm moderating this session and will share some thoughts from my faith perspective. Humanity today is struggling to harmonize the activities of a growing, rapidly developing, and fractured global population with the reality of a finite planet and our shared destiny. Yet, we are approaching the crowning stage of a millennia-long process of collective and spiritual development. The defining characteristic of this age, Baha'is believe, is the oneness of humankind. Widely accepted practices and conventions, cherished attitudes and habits will need to be re-examined in light of this reality. As long as the call for unity remains unheeded, the world's current state of disorder and degradation will worsen, possibly with catastrophic consequences, until a chastened humanity sees fit to take a significant step towards constructive change. The Baha'i writings describe that the harmonious diversity of nature provides insight into how we should treat others with dignity, respect, and compassion, and affirms our oneness. Consider the world of created beings, how varied and diverse they are in species, yet with one sole origin. All the differences that appear are those of outward form and color. This diversity of type is apparent throughout the whole of nature. Let us look at the beauty in diversity, the beauty of harmony, and learn a lesson. Baha'u'llah also enjoins his followers to practice stewardship of the earth as an expression of world citizenship, affirming that nature should not be exploited for self-interest. Only to the degree that relationships with others and the natural world are consciously improved can progress continue. The consequences of climate change are not only problems of science and technology, they are also moral, ethical, and spiritual in nature, about how we live our lives, use and distribute resources, and how much everyone is willing to contribute and change in their lives. Establishing sustainable patterns of individual and collective life, therefore, requires a new conception of ourselves and our place in the world. In a recent message, the governing body of the Baha'i Faith said that every choice a Baha'i, or in fact a human being, makes leaves a trace, and the moral duty to lead a coherent life demands that the purity of one's aims be matched by the purity of one's actions to fulfill those aims. We have an excellent panel of speakers from various faith traditions, the UN and government, and all of them have tremendous expertise and I'm going to call on each of them to share in their framing comments, after which we will have a discussion based on some questions I will pose. The audience is welcome to pose questions and comments in the chat, so please use that feature. And I am going to first turn to Sadhvi Bhagwati Saraswati ji, the Secretary General of the Global Wash Alliance. Sadhvi ji, the floor is yours.
It is such an honor to be here today with you all. And today we need spiritual, religious wisdom and vision to help us out of this darkness of ignorance and greed and destruction that we are wreaking upon our own lives. Ancient wisdom says that the frog does not drink up the well in which it lives. And yet, tragically, it seems that we are getting less wise even as we get more scientifically advanced. It's not the earth we must save. The earth will continue to exist in the fire age, if that's what we create, in the same way that she existed in the ice age. It is us, the humans, who require this very tenuous ratio of oxygen to carbon to hydrogen, and this very small window of temperature variance. It is us we need to protect and save. Tragically, so much time and energy of resource and innovation is going to figuring out the other places we can live. Can we live on the moon? Can we live on Mars? But God has given us this extraordinary planet, and together with science and spirituality, with finances and faith, with policy and prayer, we can protect and preserve our lives and the lives of all with whom we share this sacred planet. Our faith guides us and exhorts us not only to attain heaven or moksha after death, but rather to create heaven on earth here where we are living. In Hinduism, we are taught Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It means the world is a family. We are taught to see the world as a family, or in Hindi, as we say, parivar, rather than as a marketplace or a bazaar. When we see the world as a bazaar, a marketplace, there's competition, there's grabbing, grasping, stealing. But in a parivar, in a family, there's cooperation, there's sharing, there's giving, there's sacrificing. It's said that faith can move mountains. We just need it to move the minds and the behaviors back from a vision of the world as a bazaar to the world as a parivar, a family. Climate change may seem insurmountable, but actually, there is so much that every one of us can do in every choice that we make throughout our day. There isn't time to go into all of the details, but we know, for example, that animal agriculture, the raising of animals for food, is the single greatest contributor to climate change. From the carbon released by the clear cutting of the forests, to the methane excreted by the animals themselves, to the water that is used in the production. The Amazon rainforest, the source of 20% of the oxygen in the world, the absorber of about 20% of carbon emissions, and the source of approximately 20% of the fresh water on Earth, is being clear cut at this terrifying rate of an acre to 2 acres every second. An acre, an acre, an acre. For what? For beef. And it's not just what we eat. It's also what we wear and we use. Nearly every item that we buy is produced in a factory somewhere that is very likely spewing its waste into the air, into the soil, into the groundwater, into the rivers, polluting our land, polluting our water, and increasing the carbon emissions in our atmosphere. But we have a choice. We have a choice of what to buy, what to wear, what to use. Economy begins with eco. The principles of our faith implore us to return the eco to economy. And we are faced, tragically, by a global food shortage. Today is World Food Day. A global land shortage, a global water shortage. But most critically and most tragically, what we are faced with is a global consciousness shortage. And it is for that that we turn to our faith as people of faith, as leaders of faith. We have the opportunity to embody and to teach conscious living, conscious choosing, in line every moment, every minute, with the core tenets of our faith: compassion, love, nonviolence, care for the earth. We have the power as leaders of faith, as people inspired by faith, to bring health and healing for ourselves and the planet if we do it together. Lastly, in conclusion, we know that the trees are this great answer to climate change. As they give us the oxygen, they absorb the carbon dioxide, they bring water. And I just want to end with my favorite example from the redwood forest, where I originally come from in California. The redwood trees that are some of the tallest trees in the world are so tall and are so strong. Many of them are hundreds and thousands of years old, but they stand so tall and strong, not by having roots that are so deep in the ground, but rather the roots of every tree of a redwood forest are interconnected with the roots of every other tree in a redwood forest. And that is what keeps these forests the tallest, the oldest in the world. And if we, the people of faith, connect in our roots, yes, up here we speak in different languages, we worship in different ways, but if at our roots we connect in those core tenets of faith, we will protect and preserve Mother Earth for ourselves, for all of those with whom we share this planet, and for all of those of the future generations. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you this evening.
Thank you very much, Sadhviji, and for reminding us about our interconnectedness and the responsibility that each of us bears, a responsibility towards our Mother Earth. Thank you. We now move on to Dr. Juliet Biao Kudunupo, Secretary General, Regional Director for Africa at the United Nations Environment Programme. Dr. Kudunupo, it's yours.
Thank you so much, Ms. Barney. Good evening, good afternoon, depending on your time zone. The chair of the 2020 G20 Interfaith Forum Executive Steering Committee, Excellencies, all invited distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and privilege to speak before you today on a topic I consider fundamental to real and transformational climate action, and that is that the world urgently needs, and that is value-based climate action. My remarks set the context of the reality of climate change which, while on one hand, there is a clear need to increase climate ambitions, other emergencies, such as COVID-19, compete for attention and investment. The question then becomes, what additional reserve do we need to draw upon to go to the extra mile and ensure we prioritize climate action amidst the competing challenges? The answer lies in the treasuring values of selflessness above all, a command that is in direct charge in Christianity and which is called for in other religions. This then means that it is time we prioritize values-based climate action, which we can only do if we treasure the value of selflessness. I then provide in my remarks some key takeaways of value-based action that our selfless action can unlock. And finally, I gave example of the innovative volunteerism where the African youth is already demonstrating this selflessness. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change continues to be unequivocal on the urgency to increase climate action ambition globally. Next. In early September this year, 2020, collaborating with leading global knowledge and scientific agencies, released the latest analysis, the United in Science report. In a nutshell, this report was a study of the impact of the COVID-19 on climate change. The results were alarming. According to this report, climate change has not stopped for COVID-19, and the effect of any emissions, the reduction resulting from the COVID-19 containing measures have only been temporary. This verdict brings us back to the drawing board to answer a weighty and fundamental question about our response to climate change. And that question is, with the urgent need to increase climate ambition by up to 5 times on one hand, and the crippling economic effects of COVID-19 emergency on the other hand, where Africa is already facing a negative 5.1% of the GDP growth for 2020, a loss of up to 50% of all jobs, and the first recession in 25 years, among other risks. What reserve can we draw upon as a people to go the extra mile and ensure we raise climate ambition amidst this multiplicity of risk? Next. Next, please. So the answer is being true to our faith by exercising the value we are called to. The next question then becomes, what are the values we must treasure? In Christianity, the central figure of fulfillment of the faith is Jesus Christ. Next, please. His mission on the earth to save all humanity from sin and its penalty, and empower all those who accept him to do God's will. was founded in what we read in Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, which tells us that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. The one word that crystallized his ministry on earth is selflessness. This call to follow example of selflessness is reiterated in several places of the Bible. Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 is one such scripture which tells us, let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interests of others. Let's please. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the call for selflessness does not get any clearer than this. This command is similarly given in all other religions, but in different words. The message is therefore this, that to surmount the many obstacles that disrupt our focus on enhancing climate action ambition, every decision, every investment, every action must be founded on the timeless values of selflessness, of sincerity, and of singular purpose to touch many lives. This is how we will be true to our faith. And this is how we will rise above every obstacle to increase climate action, ambition, and build real resilience. Our work in Africa is focusing on, among aspects, the biggest constituency, which is the youth, to embrace selflessness at the core motivation for action. Next, please. Through an approach we call innovative volunteerism, we are structurally guiding and inspiring youth of diverse disciplinary background to improve, refine, and adapt their diverse skills, talents, aptitude, and selflessly focus on how climate action can become a tool for touching many lives in the community, as opposed to be a tool for self-serving. Though this approach, where we are seeing the youth equipped, through this approach, we are seeing the youth equipped with skills and undertaking climate and environmental action, but in a way that unlocks key socio-economic priorities of food and income security, while abating emission. For example, youth trained to fabricate mechanical solar dryer using locally available solutions are developing dryer that are up to 200% cheaper than imported solution. Next, please. Through this approach, earnings have increased up to 150% to multi-actors along the agro-supply chain, from farmers all the way to value adders, the marketers, fabricators of solar dryer, among many, and all done without piling emissions that compound climate change. The big lesson we are learning from this youth is that because of the selflessness, where they use what they have, which is the skills and talents, to offer solutions that touch many in the agro value chain, they are not only fulfilling, but making strides in Africa's climate change. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think that we need to embrace, this is the selflessness all of us here will need to embrace to unlock the following paradigms of value-based climate action. First, climate action
Thank
needs
you.
to be framed as a business and investment opportunity. Second, we need to increasingly accept that it's the most vulnerable region of the globe, like Africa. Third is the finance question. Climate finance need to move beyond social to investments and enterprise finance. Fourth, your question, we need to focus to the youth. And last is the policy coherence. Realizing the above tenet of value-based climate action will call for all of us to prioritize selflessness over self-preservation in all decisions we take at whatever level we are in. It starts with you and me. Let us win together. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Kunupo, for sharing with us your expertise from UNEP and also your own personal faith tradition. We now move to His Eminence, Metropolitan Emmanuel Adamakis of France, Exarch of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, and member of the CAICID Board of Directors. His Eminence would have led the speakers and been first in order, but due to technical reasons, we hear from him now, and we are delighted to. Your Eminence, you have the mic.
Thank you very much, and I'm really very sorry for having trouble in connecting, but I do hope that you can hear me now, although it's not probably the best way. Dear colleagues, honored participants, ladies and gentlemen, we said in the encyclical of the Holy and Great Council of the Orthodox Church in 2016 already that the roots of the ecological crisis are spiritual and ethical, inherent within the heart of each one. And this crisis has become more acute in recent centuries on account of the various divisions provoked by human passions, such as greed, avarice, egotism, and the desire for more, and by the consequences for the planet, as with climate change, which now threatens to a large extent the natural environment, our common home. Environmental care and climate change constitute challenges that pertain to justice and responsibility of a world in crisis. As you may know, the word crisis in Greek means judgment. And it is true that these issues join to the consequences of our system and challenge our lifetime. Speaking of a challenge means to be invited to think further and to act. And it means to recognize the problem by seeking a solution. And we are all willing for a solution for this earth. A challenge calls out for a solution, stimulates, puts things in motion. And how can then come, we think, of environmental care and climate change as a challenge pertaining to justice and responsibility connected to. Today's ecological challenges are not only related to globalization, it is also, I would say, geopolitical, economic, and philosophical. And what about the spiritual challenge? Are we not misled by seeing ourselves as masters and possessors of nature, a nature that has the sole and only purpose to serve us? According to the scriptures, we confess the word of God's as God's creation, in which thrives life and one can sense the divine. We therefore believe that we are an integral part of this good creation, and recognize that the destinies of nature and humanity are intimately interrelated. In this regard, the biblical texts teach us that God has given us the faithful and prudent stewardship of creation. And to protect humanity is really to protect creation. And to protect creation is to protect humanity at the same time. As the Ecumenical Patriarchate never ceases to repeat with other Christians, and especially with His Holiness Pope Francis, along with other religious leaders, the protection of the environment must be a common goal. And while some political leaders of the world are rejecting the Paris Agreement on climate change, faith-based institutions have the crucial task to raise awareness of the dangers related to the destruction of natural environment. An ecological spirituality should be a spirituality of a real conversion. By conversion, we need to understand the transformation of the inner itself as the starting point of an external change. Scientists tirelessly emphasize the need for a radical change in our lifestyles in order to reduce the polluting activities that affect climate change. And this is a reality that Christianity calls metanoia, the change of the way of thinking and acting. In the patristic tradition of the fathers of the church, especially the Desert Fathers, those seekers after the spiritual forge through centuries of ascetic experience, this metanoia, this change of nous, the change of acting, encourages a clear-sighted way of regarding humanity. It is precisely this vision that was imagined by an author, St. Isaac the Syrian, of the 7th century, who considered the goal of the spiritual life to the acquiring of a merciful heart that burns with love for all creation, for all of the gods of God's creatures. In order to meet the challenge of environmental care, we must also take on a spiritual challenge, that of converting lifestyles. And the spirit of conversion in Christian spirituality calls for an in-depth mutation, for a conversion of the being that touches and exceeds at the same time environmental issues. Love for one's neighbor, present and future, take over selfishness. And the collective action of believers will apply pressure on world leaders and global decision makers. Sobriety will respond to the appetites of over-consumerism, and sharing limits inequality, and finally charity encompasses the political and the social sphere. Through prayer and commitment, we can be led to a new life, the possibility of a sustainable, just, and peaceful society. And as Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew said, we cannot separate our concern for human dignity, human rights, or social justice from concern for ecological protection. This is what I would like to finish with that. Climate change is a sign of a spiritual blindness, but the scales may fall from our eyes. We see ourselves as part of the creation and acknowledge God in His beauty. And there, through contemplation and meditation, with the help of the Holy Spirit, we can be led to a spiritual rebirth and feeling gratitude for what has been given to us, while lead us to the realization of a responsibility to protect and to transmit. and will also make us more humble for creation, is not exhausted by scientific knowledge, nor can it be mastered by technology. Its forces and its mystery go well over and beyond us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence. It's always good to see you and hear from you, and thank you for reminding us of our common goals. We now move on to Reverend Fletcher Harper, who is the Executive Director of Green Faith. Reverend, the mic is yours.
Many thanks. We are so grateful, all of us, I know, for the opportunity to speak to the G20 at this G20 Interfaith Forum. And I know that all of us as religious and spiritual leaders take that opportunity seriously and want to respond substantively, both from a theological and from a morally informed geopolitical perspective. I am the director of Green Faith, which is an interfaith environmental organization. And so while I myself am Christian, it's a privilege to be able to speak on behalf of our community, which includes people of very diverse religious and spiritual practices from around the world. Our work is guided by values that religious communities worldwide share, values of compassion, of love, and of justice or fairness or equity. And these are the principles that guide our perspective on these issues. I'd like to say that I truly wish that we were here under circumstances that provided reasons for optimism about climate change and the status of humanity's response to it. But as people of faith, we are committed to honesty and to truthfulness. And it's important to recognize that we are far behind where we need to be, according to every reputable scientific body, in terms of marshaling the response that we need to do. We see more and more the impacts of the accelerating climate crisis in growing numbers of floods, of severe weather events, of wildfires that render regions uninhabitable, that turn air quality into the worst in the world in places previously that hadn't suffered from that challenge. We together are deeply concerned, and we feel that one thing that religious groups need to do is to acknowledge the emotional dimension of the climate crisis, to recognize our fear, our despair, our frustration, even our anger, that more has not been done to address this issue. And following that foundation to our approach, I'd like to take the remainder of my time to speak directly to a communiqué issued by the G20 energy ministers some 2 weeks ago. This, I would assume, forms an important part of the substance of the G20's perspective on the climate crisis, and I'm grateful again for this opportunity to respond to it. I'm afraid that I must say that from Green Faith's perspective, the G20 energy ministers' communiqué was profoundly disappointing, morally deficient, and cause for great concern. Firstly, this communiqué made absolutely no direct mention of climate change, an omission that is, to be frank, unfathomable in this day and age. Furthermore, it called directly for government bailouts for the fossil fuel sector around the world. This at a time, again, where the scientific consensus could not be clearer that what's needed is a managed decline of the fossil fuel sector, a massive scaling up of renewable energy sources around the world, and government's full commitment to that task. This approach that the G20 energy ministers endorsed is exactly not what the world needs, not what the world needs in order to prevent the massive level of humanitarian harm that climate change will create. Instead of a managed decline and an energy transition, unimaginably, the G20 energy ministers called for a continuance of the energy status quo. Very difficult to fathom. Since 2009, the G20 itself has called for an elimination of fossil fuel subsidies, a bright spot in the G20's record on these issues. Again, disappointingly, that call is notably absent, not only from the energy ministers of the G20, but from the broader forum itself. A next concern about this communiqué is that it called for an extensive reliance to address assumedly the climate crisis, though that was not named directly, an extensive reliance on unproven carbon capture and storage technologies, which have variously been referred to as different forms of climate engineering. And we'd like to raise again profound concerns about this emphasis. These technologies, let us be very clear, are proven at scale. In other words, we simply do not know if they work. We do not know what their side effects are. These have not been studied. There is no governance structure globally to oversee their implementation. They are, in the best possible presentation of them, at a highly experimental phase. Furthermore, these technologies, if implemented successfully, do nothing to reduce the very substantial amount of air pollution that comes along with burning various forms of fossil fuels. Air pollution, which, according to the World Health Organization, is responsible directly for over 5 million premature deaths annually around the world, deaths concentrated among the world's poorest populations. This is not an acceptable trade-off from the perspective of faith communities, nor is the moral hazard that comes with proposing a misguided technological fix relying on unproven technologies to the rapid scaling up of solar and wind and geothermal technologies, which are proven and which must constitute the bulk of the solution to the climate crisis. Thirdly, the G20 energy ministers communique focused on a very important topic, one that's dear to our hearts, the topic of energy access. The fact that at this point in time, close to 850 million people around the world lack access to modern forms of electricity or of energy. Faith leaders understand that access to energy is a profoundly moral issue. People need access to energy in order to have access to healthcare, to be able to start and sustain productive enterprises, to be able to enhance education, to protect the health and well-being of women. It's an absolute imperative. But the G20 energy ministers communique called for the energy access gap to be closed by the use of fossil fuels. Again, a choice that is not possible if we're serious at all about addressing the climate crisis, and in our perspective, not the right way to solve a tremendously important moral and humanitarian issue. This is why faith groups have come together with philanthropic partners around the world to create the SHINE campaign to increase donor support and investment in decentralized, locally owned, women-led renewable energy enterprises. So I'll close by saying that there is no way to meet the climate threat without the end of the dominance of fossil fuels as a global energy supply. And as Sadhviji noted, without an end to tropical deforestation and an end to large-scale animal agriculture. It is very simply scientifically impossible. Faith leaders are eager to engage about the true challenges that lie ahead as we face the climate crisis. But we cannot accept or endorse a denial of the fundamental reality of the context that we face. We are committed to compassion, to love, and to justice. And we would urge the G20 to reconsider the energy ministers' communique and to provide the world with a vision of hope in relationship to this grave crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Harper, for these important reminders and priorities. We now move to His Excellency Margaritis Guinness, Vice President in the European Commission with a portfolio of promoting the European way of life. Your Excellency, the mic is yours.
Thank you. I'm delighted to represent the European Union in this Interfaith G20 Interfaith Forum to discuss the role of faith groups in addressing climate change and safeguarding the planet. It is a very positive development that religious organizations have become much more involved in environmental and climate change issues, especially after or during and the wake of the 2015 Paris Climate Conference. And I want to start by saying that climate change is not just an issue of science or technology. It is also a moral, an ethical, and a spiritual issue. It is about how we live our lives, how we use and distribute resources, and how much everyone is willing to contribute. And a number of religious leaders, His Holiness the Pope and His Holiness the Ecumenic Patriarch, have underlined the need to protect nature seen as God's creation and to be attentive to the human dimension of environmental policies. So I'm delighted that this discussion allows us to bring the issue of values and ethics into the debate. We in the European Union have the solid ambition to become the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. This is one of our core political priorities, and this entails a bundle of ambitious policies, both at home and a close cooperation with international partners abroad. We have already committed to cut 55% of emissions by 2030, so that by 2050 we hit the overall target of zero emissions. But this is not only about targets or quantitative objectives. It is also about a set of deeply transformative policies which aim at changing the EU economy, society, and natural environment. This is about who we are and how we live our lives in this century. We are developing, to achieve these very ambitious goals, we are developing a just transition mechanism to deliver a new future for regions most exposed to the economic and social challenges of the climate change transition. And last July, we have put forward a historic recovery instrument of 750 billion euros that would allow us to coordinate the recovery efforts following the pandemic. And if we would add to that our 7 years budget until 2017, the overall amount that we aspire to use to boost Europe's growth and recovery would be a sum that would near 2 trillion euros until 2027. 30% of this unprecedented sum will be dedicated to climate-related spending. So, as you see, our ambitions for a greener and different, more digital Europe will be accompanied not only by policy targets, but also by substantial resources. In the process of green transition, Europe would like to invite our global partners to do three things. First, talk with each other. There are important conversations that must take place. We will look for narratives from different parts of the world on how people in different settings can see, commit, engage in climate and environmental change. We need to listen, and we need to acknowledge the hopes and the fears that this transition. Secondly, we need to get inspired and act. Our aim is to help new initiatives start, replicate, and scale up existing ones. And finally, we need to develop shared leadership. Everybody has a role to play. There are already many initiatives out there, and we want to help a European and a global movement for climate and environmental action to grow and consolidate. As representatives of religious organizations and faith groups, there are many ways in which you can take part, both as organizations but also as individuals. I therefore encourage you and your organizations to continue to play an active role in the evolution of this green transition, which can be a very useful tool for us as we move forward in achieving this historic objective. In particular, the churches and organizations you represent today have recalled that our environmental policies are not only a set of technical measures, but they are based in a new mindset, in a new ethical and values-based and values-driven approach to ecology. And many of you have called the need for a human ecology, a human-centered approach which takes into account, in particular, the social dimension of environmental policies. Dear friends, through this channel of communication, we seek the opinion of all of you to enhance and fertilize our policy drive. We are at a moment where we do not need more voices of division and hatred. Engagement with the religious and faith groups present across Europe a unique opportunity, a process that we find essential in this context. And people of faith have shown civic engagement and creativity that when faced with difficult times, we need cultural and spiritual resources more active, more present than ever before. We greatly rely on your engagement and continued contribution when the time comes to think through this crisis and rebuild our societies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We now move on to Rabbi Abraham Sotondorf, President of Green Cross, Netherlands. Rabbi, you have the mic.
Shalom, peace, Shanti, to all who are joining us on this road to healing the earth. It's such a blessed opportunity to have the togetherness of faith and governments and the G20, and such a wonderful opportunity to be also virtually in Saudi Arabia. I thank the minister for his thoughts and his hospitality. I think also the minister of Norway as a champion for peace and cooperation. I'm reminded of a conference, the first conference on this global ecology consciousness in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. At the end of it, faith leaders were also together with political leaders. And political leaders said to us, please continue to prod us to take measures that may seem to contravene national self-interest, but are necessary to keep together the health of the earth. And we just heard Reverend Fletcher, who spoke in this way of prodding. But it is done in the understanding that we are all humans who are created and born in dignity and rights. It is in the Jewish calendar, in a few hours, the first Shabbat, that we read again the beginning of the scriptures. And so we read about the creation of the earth and the creation of the human being. And there it says, human being is created le'ovda u'leshomra, to cultivate and work on it and to protect it. We may say it in the modern terminology of the Earth Charter, the protection of vitality, beauty, and diversity is a sacred trust, and we must honor this trust. Yes, we stand on a critical moment in Earth history. We are all faced by the fragility, and we pray that a vaccine will be found to safeguard us from illness. And at the same time, we have to bring together the antidote of cooperation, of not leaving any human being and any living alone and behind. And we must and we can do it. I find that this panel also combines one of the blessings that we experience, that finally people from all spiritual traditions and humanism desperately understand the need to be together in a compassionate way. And I plead with our political leadership also to take with us the step forward from the 75 years ago blessing of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and to see the combination that is endowed in all of us, the combination of reason and conscience. We need a new way. The parable that we share from Judaism, but many other traditions, is so urgent. All humanity is one body. When one part of the body aches, the rest of the body feels it. We can only find a new way of cooperation, and we need each other. Therefore, I hope that in the governments that are now surrounded in this crisis by council of advisors from science and from those who understand the virus, that the council will be widened, and it will become, together with faith, a councils of conscience. And the councils of conscience will give us the opportunity to accelerate and intensify all that has been said here, all the facts of what faces us. We can do it. And I know that God and all his names require us to do it. Yes, there is another blessing, the blessing of our youth, of the next generations, those who come forward understanding it is your home and we want to inherit to you a world that is breathing with ability to give concern and life to each other, and not a door of death. And I am full of belief in this hour, with all my heart, that we will be able to do it. And that you who are living, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in 75 years from now, will celebrate liberation, will celebrate that 5 years before you have lived, we have taken the right measures, the wise and compassionate and scientifically sound measures together that allow you to live in a life of peace and justice. May God bless the work of our hands forever.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Sotondorf, for those passionate words that have reached to my heart, and I'm sure to the hearts of those that are listening and watching this session. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. We are now going to move to a discussion portion of our segment today. And given the shortage of time, I'm going to pose one question for all the participants to answer. And I ask that they take no more than 1 minute. And at the end of 1 minute, I'm going to sound this gong so that we can keep to time and maybe even squeeze in a second question. So this is for everybody. What can be done to strengthen and build the often crucial partnerships between secular and faith-based actors to protect the environment? What principles can serve to unite us? And when do such collaborations work well? And I ask you to share some examples. So, given that I was first going to pose this question to His Excellency Skinas, I'm going to ask you to begin, and then I'm going to call on each of the other panelists. So, Your Excellency, if you'd like to answer this question.
Yes, thank you for this question, which goes at the heart of our work here in Brussels, because precisely our treaties, our constitution, if you like, compels us through a specific article, Article 17, to have a regular and open dialogue between the European Union institutions and the faith communities and the secular non-confessional organizations. So this is a regular annual exercise in which we try to combine the two traditions, if you like, that have shaped Europe through the centuries, the religious tradition, of course, and the secular non-confessional. And the method has proven a success, because it enables us to fertilize from both schools of thought and both traditions the richness of the contribution in a way that allows us to achieve the same goal, which is the green transition. So this is something that this year, of course, due to the pandemic, we haven't been able to do it yet, but this is one of our top priorities, immediate priorities. We'll have the first virtual meeting with the churches and the religious groups in November, and the secular and non-confessional organizations early next year.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time. I now go to Reverend Fletcher Harper. Would you like to tackle that question, Reverend Harper?
Certainly. I think the two thoughts. One is, I think it's very important for religious actors, players, communities to think carefully about how they can make the biggest impact. Very often, for example, local faith communities can pressure their municipalities to commit to 100% renewable energy use, or can play vital roles in working with secular partners to oppose deforestation projects or new fossil fuel infrastructure or the like, or can initiate community engagement around sustainable consumption or sustainable lifestyles. So I think the first thing is think about where you can make the biggest impact. And then the second thing I'd say for religious groups is study both the theology and the practicality. Have your sacred text in one hand and the day's newspaper in the other hand, so that you can make a substantial moral contribution to public discourse about the issues. Not only speaking about the issues, not only quoting sacred texts, but bringing those into dialogue to help people understand why these issues matter as moral and religious issues.
Thank you so much. Sadhviji, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think it's really critical for us to recognize that the days of silos and vacuums have to be over if there ever was a time that they were appropriate. And for us as people of faith, as spiritual leaders, as religious people, to recognize that this is not the time, if there ever was a time, for us to decide to sit this one out. We are called upon every minute and every moment through the calling of our faith as embodiments of divinity in human bodies occupying this sacred Mother Earth. We are called upon to act and to serve. If you look at the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, to be an instrument of mercy, of grace. If you look at the teachings in the Hindu tradition, to be a tool in God's hands, we are constantly being exhorted to be useful, to be helpful, to be instruments, to be tools. And today, we can only do that if we work hand in hand with secular organizations, with governments, with education. And I know our Global Interfaith WASH Alliance is constantly, in so many ways, joining hands with both local secular groups as well as with government in education, because we all breathe the same air. There's no religious people air and atheists air. There's no Hindu river and Christian river. It's all one air, it's all one water. And so we have to take care of them together as one. And as soon as we really recognize that this isn't about theology, this is about living together as a family. And sure, even as in a normal family, different people have different ways of living, different inclinations. But nonetheless, they come together to take care of the home. And when we realize that, we do whatever we need to do to be tools for that and instruments for that.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Sotondorf, would you like to answer the question?
Well, it's one of the importance of this time is to find cooperation, a beyond borders, a new vitality of cooperation between nations. And so it's vital that we are also part. May I say something to us, the religious interfaith community? It is so heartening that we are working together, but we have to do more and more to be united and to make our voice, to give an example how cooperation can really be effective. So I'm very much encouraged that in Europe there is now this conversation going on, but the urgency, and this I finally want to say, we have 10 years to really realize the Sustainable Development Goals, the accords on climate change, the moment of that is still a possibility. We have such a short time. And so it's sacred time. And we share that with all our partners. and let us really find this cooperation in every part of the world.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Sotondorf. Your Eminence, would you like to add to what our colleagues have said?
Yeah, I really don't know what I can add because everything I think is already said. But I would like to point out that definitely we are not alone as units, but we are acting as a community or communities. And if we expect to have something change in the way of our lifestyle today, is that we can definitely change the world if we change ourselves first. So this is why I stressed earlier that we need to have this conversion, this change of the way we act and we think. You know, miracles did not only happen in the past; they can happen even today. But for miracles to happen, first of all, we have to believe in what we are doing. And this is important to think always. And then I would like to say that it's important, and Rabbi mentioned it earlier, that we have today a way of synergy, working together, all communities, through dialogue, but through action. What I like also to mention is that this Interfaith G20 is not just for all of us, but it's a way to bring these expectations and these wishes to the G20, to the political decision makers. And this is important, and we thank for this opportunity to be a vehicle of everybody to be listened by those who take all the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kudinoko, would you like to add your views? I
You are
believe your
muted.
microphone.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Ms. Bani. I think many has been said, and I stressed on the selflessness in my presentation. I think it takes a change of mindset. It takes a recognition that we have one and indivisible planet. Whether we are religious or we are from the local secular group, we share one planet. I think if we have this understanding, I think we can come together and save this planet together. And the universal character of the Paris Agreement really showed very well that, whether we are affected or non-affected countries, we came together because we believe we have the same and one planet. And just to borrow from the Reverend, the statement about, that we are from the same and one body, I think if that we can recognize it, the cooperation can come together. And since its resolution in 2008 on the promotion of interreligious and intercultural dialogue, the United Nations General Assembly really has started promoting this dialogue among religious and people from secular group, just really to encourage really dialogue, tolerance, and tolerance is really a key word. If we can tolerate each other, we can really come together to speak and find solution about our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To the audience, I'd like to remind you that we have an evaluation link in the chat for you to provide feedback, and it would be very helpful for the organizers to improve these sessions in the future. So please do take a few seconds to click on that link and provide us your feedback. We have had a really interesting and thought-provoking session. It is clear that when true to the spirit of its founders, religion has been one of the most powerful tools for the creation of new and beneficial patterns of individual and community life. And it encourages traits such as truthfulness, equity, trustworthiness, generosity, and demonstrates the value of cooperation as an organizing principle for activity, making a community resilient in the face of shocks. And clearly, we are experiencing one of those moments right now with this pandemic. And it has been really heartening to hear from all the speakers and the passion and the commitment that we've heard today. And I hope that this collective task is going to inspire us all to the future in walking this path together. Before closing, I would also like to note that following the break, there are 3 very interesting panel discussions which will run concurrently. Panel discussion 10 will begin following a 15-minute break, and the other 2 panels will begin on time as listed in the program. So again, I wish you all well. This has been a wonderful experience, and I'm truly grateful for all the organizers, CAICID, the UN Alliance of Civilization, the Interfaith Forum for the G20, and others for this opportunity. Thank you very much.